Welcome back. More breaking news. The Justice Department and the FBI only partly meeting the deadline set in a subpoena from House Republicans to hand over classified documents on the Russia investigation. After lawmakers threatened to hold officials in contempt of Congress, House Speaker Paul Ryan's office said it finds the request for additional time on the remaining documents reasonable. But House Intel Chairman Devin Nunes firing off a new letter to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein demanding answers by tomorrow night. Texas Congressman John Ratcliffe sits on one of the panels that questioned and requested the documents, the House Judiciary Committee. He also serves on the House Homeland Security Committee and is a former U.S. attorney. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
You bet.
I want to start off with your congressional testimony last week where you were questioning Michael Horowitz, and you were talking about all of the bias between the FBI and the DOJ against Donald Trump. Here's a clip from that.
You revealed the astonishing level, the outrageous level of bias and prejudice. And when you did, Special Counsel Mueller removed Peter Strzok from the case. But you and I are former prosecutors, and you and I both know that it is impossible to remove bias and prejudice from all of the actions taken, all of the decisions made, all of the investigative plans implemented, all of the evidence gathered by Peter Strzok and at least two other Trump-hating FBI agents and lawyers who were assigned to the investigation. That's pretty hard to do, isn't it?
Well, that is precisely the question, as you know, we're looking at.
Precisely the question we're looking at, Congressman, but we know that Horowitz came out and said that all of this political bias did not change the outcome of the Hillary Clinton investigation. And then we see this op-ed in the Journal yesterday, exactly what you said, entitling Mueller's fruit of the poison tree. So it basically says it makes no difference how honorable he is. This investigation is tainted by the bias that attended its origin in 2016. That's basically the point you're making, isn't it?
That's exactly right, Maria. What's remarkable about the testimony that we heard from the Inspector General is it wasn't some partisan Republican. This is the FBI's own independent referee who's saying that he's deeply troubled and concerned that it is Peter Strzok and other Trump-hating agents and lawyers collecting evidence and making every decision for the first 9 months of that investigation, that is, by definition, prejudicial to the fair and impartial administration of justice. And as that Wall Street Journal article talks about, it raises the legitimate legal question of fruit of the poisonous tree, that if your foundational evidence is so corrupted and tainted by how it's been collected, if it violates due process through bias and prejudice, then everything that comes after that, every search warrant that's obtained, every confession that's obtained, even every plea agreement that's entered into is likewise tainted or poisoned. And the Supreme Court has weighed in on that and had said specifically in cases like U.S. v. Russell and Blackledge v. Perry that the vindictiveness of prosecutors can be that poison fruit for which you throw out the entire case. So if this were in a court of law, that's the case that Donald Trump's lawyers would be making right now.
So do you think the special counsel should finish?
Well, Maria, I have been one of the few Republicans who has really not questioned the integrity of Bob Mueller. I have tried not to do that. But this, again, is not a reflection on Bob Mueller. This is a reflection on the evidence that he was handed. For 9 months, you have the most biased, hateful, prejudiced people making the decisions, collecting the evidence, implementing the investigative plan. Listen, I've heard what Hillary Clinton has said about Donald Trump, and I've read every text message that Peter Strzok and these others have said about Donald Trump. I think if Hillary Clinton had been in charge of the Trump-Russia investigation, the level of bias and prejudice wouldn't have been any higher. So those are things that Bob Mueller ultimately is going to have to persuade the American people. You know, maybe he's a lot better lawyer than I am, but I was never able to stand in front of a jury and explain away, yeah, the person in charge here hated the defendant, was biased and prejudiced against him, but none of that impacted the actions that he took in collecting the information.
So
that's pretty tough. That's pretty tough to do.
We know that your colleagues have been asking for these documents from the Department of Justice, Congressman, and we have the latest letter from Devin Nunes. I have it in my hands, the chairman of the Intel Committee, who is giving the DOJ and the FBI another deadline of tomorrow night by 5 o'clock. And one of the questions that he asks is, did the FBI use informants against members or associates of the Trump campaign? And if so, how many informants were used and how much money was spent on their activities? And one of the issues that he's raising is, was there activity before the actual investigation launched in July of 2016? Why is this such an important point? Why do you and your colleagues want to know if there was any activity in terms of spying on the Trump campaign before the actual launch of the investigation?
Because we've been told that there wasn't. Representations have been made to members of Congress and to the American people that this started in July, on July 31st of 2016, that's when all of this started. And so we've made specific inquiry based on some reporting that's been out there that there were actually confidential human sources involved investigating the Trump campaign before the case was officially opened on July 31st of 2016. And so, you know, what we want are the documents that would establish that. What we want is a very clear answer from the FBI and the Department of Justice, and that's not what we've gotten in the classified and unclassified responses that came in late on Friday night. So Devin Nunes and other members are exactly right that we deserve, as the elected representatives of the people with oversight of this, to get an answer to that question and to get it quickly. Look, we don't want any drama. We want the documents, and we want real clear answers from our own justice officials. And so there's a lot of debate and discussion right now about, if we don't get those, how quickly we move and what measures are taken and against whom.
So I really want to see how high up the ladder this goes in the Obama administration, because I know that your committee has subpoenaed Peter Strzok, and you're going to be questioning him next week. I'm going to get to that in a moment. But let me take you back to a testimony by Michael Daniel, who was President Obama's cyber chief, and he was speaking before the Senate, where he basically admitted that his boss told him to stand down on an investigation. Listen to this.
But as far as your cyber response, you were told to stand down. Is that correct?
We were. Those actions were put on the back burner. Yes, we were, and that was not the focus of our activity during that time period.
So Susan Rice told Michael Daniel not to worry about Russia meddling in an election, Congressman?
Well, as the chairman of the Cybersecurity Subcommittee on Homeland in the House, I got to tell you, I was so astonished to hear that testimony from Michael Daniel. Let me put it in context. On July 31st of 2016, you have the Obama administration initiating an aggressive investigation into the Trump campaign under the pretext or pretense that it's about national security and fear that the Trump campaign may be colluding with the Russians to interfere with our election. A week later, you have Obama administration officials telling our own cyber chief to stand down to any Russian efforts to respond to their efforts to interfere with our election. Those two positions are incongruous. And it raises a really fair question about whether the Trump investigation was really about national security or whether it was about a political agenda, especially when you layer on top of that who they assigned. Peter Strzok and a bunch of Trump-hating to investigate President Trump.
Keep it right there, Congressman.
Maria, it's hard not to reach some dark conclusions.